thank you for joining us and welcome back. You're tuning in to CEE Centre for Young Black Professionals 2023 video podcast series titled The Way Forward, Black Mental Health and Changemakers. This episode is a conversation about Black women's mental health and physical health in the workplace. Before we get started, I want to do a very meaningful acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land in which we live, work, raise our families, and live our day-to-day lives. We pay tribute to the many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people that were the original stewards of this land. We also want to acknowledge those who were involuntary, forcibly displaced Africans brought here by the transatlantic slave trade. The CEE team is very grateful for the opportunity to utilize this space to deliver our services, to support and empower the Black community that now calls this city home. We also want to give a quick shout out and appreciation to the City of Toronto for their support towards this meaningful project. So today I'm welcome for this wonderful conversation by Shequita. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Hi folks, my name is Shequita Thompson-Reid, she, her pronouns, and a little bit about me and myself. I started this work really in community. Community has been a big part of how I've come to know this work and learn it. First starting off in community economic development in particular, looking at social determinants of health, working with community, and then moving into working with young people. And so I've worked with young people for the better part of 15, 18 years. I now occupy and work in spaces alongside around shelter, housing, and consulting around anti-racism and equity work. And so that's how I fill my time. And I'm a mom of 3, so all of those things put together.
Love it. Thank you for joining us. And also, the lovely Laura is with us. Do you want to? Yeah?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Hammond. I consider myself a community collaborations conductor. All that to say, I enjoy working front lines in community, meeting people, really enjoy seeing change happen, positive change, and being part of inciting that change. Through the last 10 years, I would say I got Community Engagement 101 experience, starting my own nonprofit organization, and then later on collaborating with others. All of that was fueled by, wanting to see a better environment, not just for myself, but for my children and for other youth in the community. And by doing that, it really opened my eyes to work with other partners by going out to meetings, volunteering, just really getting abreast of what some of the issues were and challenges in the community. And that has really framed my holistic view of what inclusivity really means. Other than that, just really inspired to raise my beautiful children. I have 7 lovely children, an amazing partner who's very supportive, and I love doing what I do.
Well, thank you both for joining us. My name is Trynée Hancock, and I have the privilege and the honor of working here at CEE Centre for Young Black Professionals. And I've also been very privileged to work very closely with both of you in the work that I do. And so I'm so excited for this conversation. So let's get into it. I think it's the first important step when talking about Black women's mental and physical health specifically is let's lay it on the line. What unique mental and physical health challenges do Black women face in the workplace? It's a large question, right?
It is.
Huge. Do you want to? Yeah. Okay. Unique challenges in the workplace. I think for me, when I think oftentimes where we land is that Black women are not believed in the workspace. We say our experiences, we talk about it, we're oftentimes encouraged to speak about it, and oftentimes we are met with invalidation that happens, the microaggressions that happens. And I want to say that although it's micro, it is not micro to the impact it has, right? And so all of the invalidations, the assaults we have, the invalidating how we belong in spaces, oftentimes we're seen as threats. And so for me, I think about the unique challenges and why it's specific to Black women, because I think of our intersections of sexism and how patriarchy and how it shows up in our Black skin. And so also how misogynoir really anchors all those pieces in our unique experiences in the workplace.
Yeah, well said. I would, second a lot of that and just highlight the fact that what I've seen in some of the challenges is, not being able to be the face of change at times. So sometimes there's a lot of that invalidation happening where it's the sidebar conversations of getting all of the juice and the information out of you. But when it comes to presenting it, oftentimes it's very overshadowed as to what their contributions really are.
I think those two pieces are so interesting. I think like in knowing who's going to hear this conversation, it could be a woman who's in her current career right now or a young woman who's starting out her career. And I think for me, one of the things that I couldn't identify early on because no one was talking about it was what was going on. I think too often people think a policy is protection, but you can't write down every microaggression in a policy. And when you do things like that, often it subtracts from the human experience of what you felt is valid no matter if it was in that policy or not. And Laura, I really liked what you said about the further damage that's done by that conversation that's happening around the office and what the impact of that can happen. I think also like just knowing that it's okay to take inventory of what's going on, right? People often don't have the choice of deciding to go back into work. It's a necessity. And so taking inventory to assure that you're right with yourself, right? Yeah.
And I also think the gaslighting that comes with it, right? Like you talk about really when you're like fresh out in this field, or even you've been in the field for decades and like you an OG in it. And folks still, like, we still have moments where we feel gaslighted about our experiences, right? We're like, did this just really happen? I feel something is happening in my body. I am unsure. I don't feel safe. I am shutting down or withdrawing from this space, or I need to protect myself. Like all of those things happen in spaces for us as Black women, and how the system oftentimes is designed for us to even invalidate our own experiences, right? And second guess it, because policy sometimes for folks is the checkbox of equating it that we've moved somewhere, right? And it's our kind of, it allows us to be able to not be accountable, right, for the experiences and the impact that's happening.
Yeah, 100%. I also think it's really important for us as Black women or biracial women or women of color to talk about the active grooming that can happen since childhood, of like what it means or how we should be presenting ourselves, and then how that can translate in the workplace. I think like specifically around hair and bodies. For me, growing up in all white spaces, I was petted all my childhood. And so it took me a really long time to know, like it didn't feel great. Like it really didn't feel great, but it took me a long time to understand that that actually was physical harm and further mental harm to me, because it shifted my reality of who I thought I was. So I think it's very important to talk about that piece as well. I don't know, do you guys want to share some thoughts on those pieces?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, as soon as you said that, the first thing that came to me was hair. When it came to the grooming, not being able to come to work as your full self is a huge challenge. Or to be told that your full self is unprofessional, inappropriate, right? By whose standards are we gauging that by? And it does a lot of harm in terms of people understanding what their identity means on a psychological level, on just a whole sociological level as well, right? Like when I learned what it means to rock an afro and the power we have, elemental power that comes with, you know, I felt so proud. And I honestly wish that I could have spoken to my younger self to say, it's okay. It's okay. Don't, you know, when it comes to a point where you're fearing your natural self, yeah, there's a lot of trauma that comes with that. So overall, I think that, and I feel like even government can take that into account too. I recently actually heard, I think it was a few years ago, that there was like a minister that was told, no, you can't rock braids in Parliament. I'm thinking, really? Really? We should be beyond that. But I feel like it's baby steps, but I am seeing it. It's coming to fruition. We see a lot more natural hair in the workplace, which is beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think respectability plays so much in in the proximity to how whiteness is maintained and palpable to mainstream wherever organization, insert organization here, right? And it's it's an active resistance to show up as our full selves. And so sometimes that can feel very hard in spaces, especially when we know that we are already a site of threat, right? And so I think of the harm that takes, the courage, the guts that it takes to have affirming spaces. For me, the spaces that were always affirming were with other Black folks who gave permission unapologetically to be yourself, right? I think that's low-key why I've immersed myself in community for so long, just because you feel seen, right? And so when you are in other spaces where you are scrutinized and surveillanced in different ways, you become very conscious of that, right? And so, you know, I always love the statement, personal is political, because it is political to wear an afro. It is political for me to rock my earrings that says Black Girl Magic in spaces. And I see folks reading the earrings low key and they're like, I don't know. Tell me how you really feel, right? But they're so polite. In Canadian culture, we're too polite to even like ask or, you know, question. And it's in those moments I feel solidified and anchored in identity. And so I really, for me at least, try to have totems of reminders, especially in spaces that may not always show up as safe.
I love that. I think I'm just going to give a shout out to C and all the other B3 organizations that are pushing, because it's a special privilege and honor to work in a space that is Black founded, Black focused, and Black led. The way your shoulders come down when you step into a room of all Black women and Black men leaders doing their job at high levels it changes the way you show up for work. All those little things can melt away really easily, and it becomes about the work and the community, and that's what you have a job for, right? You don't have a job for all those other things. It's supposed to add to your life, make you grow, challenge you, not bring you trauma on a day-to-day basis. So shout out to C and all the B3 organizations. So let's take this a bit further. What are some specific workplace stressors that disproportionately affect the mental health of Black women? And I even think that we touched on this a bit. Like, one of the biggest things for me is working in a place that has no diversity.
Yeah.
That is a stressor in of itself.
Yeah. Definitely.
You want to?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like there's so many. I mean, from the onboarding practice, I feel like it's so important to relay the fact that there's space for their well-being, knowing that, you know, it's not a race, right? When that culture is embedded in the organization to say that, you know, this is your role, this is what you were hired for, this is what we expect of you, instead of this is your role, However, can you do this? Can you do that? The unexpected ask, right? And then there comes, some of the fear of, not being able to secure your job properly and have a sustainable space. Because I do often feel like sometimes it's considered that because we know you can take on more stress, why don't you? Right. And
The resiliency of it all.
the resiliency of it
Yes,
all,
yes.
right? So I would say that. So just in the onboarding practice, in the culture of the environment, being sure that, they're not taking us as Black women for granted and thinking that because we can, we should. Other than that, just being more inclusive and transparent about what the process of growth looks like. You may have come in as this. However, there is an opportunity for you, making sure that opportunity is present, right? Often we were told about the glass ceiling and so forth. I don't care what color the ceiling is. If there's one that exists, there's the challenge, right? In community, I would say I've seen organizations that, pride themselves in doing community development work, and all of the frontline staff are Black. And the higher you go up, the more void of melanin happens. And it to me, it's a disservice, right? Also, the stress is thinking because you're Black, you can deal with the Black employees and Black customers. We got to get out of the faux pas. And so those are some of the stressors I see. Lack of transparency, lack of opportunity and growth, and the lack of consideration for one's self-care.
I also think that there's that visible ladder of like, is the person of color going to be the first one out? Like if something goes south, are you just going to cut everyone that doesn't align with the status quo? No matter how hard they work, no matter how many things were on their plate? What do you think, Shequita?
Yeah, I definitely echo everything that you both said and shared. I think for me, I think of, so thinking about structure and systems, I'm thinking about how white supremacy culture shows up in organizations. And in particular, oftentimes we are pitted against each other. So maybe we're not the only. But maybe there's one other across the hall that we low-key say, what up to. I think of how oftentimes in structures of whiteness that we are positioned and pitted against each other. And it's almost like survival of the fittest, right? And there's only so much room that is based on factors of scarcity for us to reach this pinnacle of whatever it is, right? And so I think of how that's reproduced in culture. And so I think of the fractured or frayed relationships that happens as a result of that, the impact on Black bodies and Black women and men and gender diverse folks who oftentimes are the front line on that battalion because we know we carry labor of different ways because we feel this deeply. And oftentimes when we're working in institutions where it's deeply connected to impacts connected to our lives, we will show up different. I will go harder if it's something connected to poverty because I know how that shows up for like little Black kids and brown kids who look like me in spaces and how I've grown up, right? And so the labor, we wear the labor different, right? And I think oftentimes of how folks don't know what to do with that when they see it. They're like, go Shequita, go, keep taking more, right? And oftentimes there's no protection, as you said, no protection for us, right? And the accountability structure is so that we're oftentimes never given the courtesy, the dignity to learn, grow, and progress, right? There's studies that show that, in workforce culture, oftentimes Black folks and Black women don't get a lot of career coaching to progress, right? And we see that. And so what happens is folks don't know how to manage us, right? They're like, she's good if I say anything, right? And so we actually never get real tangible feedback of how to improve or progress, right? And so we oftentimes stay.
We get feedback, but it's often like, she has an attitude. Here's how you.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
the feedback.
Oh, yeah. That's the
right?
feedback. Yeah. The feedback is around like that, but nothing where we can utilize it for growth. You know?
Or you're great, stay here. I
Yes.
need you here to do my job.
Yes. Yes, right? And so, and then when we try to move, we're seen as threats, right? And so I think about those things that weigh on us, weigh in terms of how we show up, our full selves, our relationship to other Black folks in spaces, especially when it's in proximity or in direct alignment with white culture and how whiteness is maintained in organizations.
Though that all resonates with me. There's a shout out to Insecure, but there is a good Insecure episode where Yvonne's character, she's a lawyer, and this is all that plays out in the episode, where there's only 2 Black lawyers, and Yvonne toes the line of like what is proper, and she gets a quick promotion, whereas her colleague is what is stereotypical. And they don't want anything to do with her, and they actually downgrade her, right? And so it plays out right there for everyone to see, which is great for Issa Rae, who did that, to like put it on paper and put it on the screen. This is what we deal with when we go into places. If we don't act a certain way, if we don't fit into your mold, this is what is the result. Meanwhile, the rest of the organization can conduct themselves however they want to, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So all of that resonates. So my next question is, what roles do intersectionality play in mental health and physical health of Black women in the workplace? And how can this be better understood?
I'd love for you to take this.
No, yeah, absolutely. So oftentimes when we hear like intersectionality, especially in like diversity work nowadays, it's like this mythical thing, it's this sexy thing, it's this, but like thinking about like when like Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term, and like legal feminist and scholar, really talking about the compounding layers of all of our identity factors that oftentimes are pushed out from society, and they're compounded in terms of the layers of oppression that we face, right? And so I think about for someone who is a Black woman who's disabled within the workspace, and how that shows up in their bodies, right? What policies are there that are never actually holds you, the experiences of harm that we then face and map onto our bodies, right? We know like trauma oftentimes gets mapped on. And then if we're in like high burnout, stressful work, that's amplified, right? And so I think about, all of the intersecting layers that we don't leave at the door. I don't leave that I'm an immigrant woman at the door when I walk through one. I'm an immigrant Black woman, who came to this country very young, and all of the complexities that show up in that. And so those things always walk and move with me in any space. And so I think about how those places, and depending how I'm read, sometimes I'm read because folks are, are like, oh, she looks like a kid, so we're not going to really take what she says seriously, because what did you really mean by that, right? And so our level of competency gets scrutinized in spaces, right? And sometimes depending how you speak, gives you a certain leverage of currency that you get in spaces. So I also think about when we don't ascribe to that, how all of those intersecting layers show up and further harm us in the workplace, right? And those are some of the examples for me in like moving through spaces of how we carry and shoulder that. And then the gaslighting, but also the when we internalize those pieces as a result, and the violence that we experience in that.
It's so interesting. Like, we all have the privilege of being mothers here, but it's it's so interesting how easy it seems in our brains that when you allow people to be their true self, how they're able to thrive versus the return on investment approach of we pay you this, so we expect to get this. But thinking about all the things that people put into their work, mental, physical experience, like if you allow them to be their full self and do that work, how much more of a thriving organization you can have. I love everything you just said, Shequita. I agree with it all. Laura, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, also what you were mentioning previously about the white supremacy culture, the fact that that's a culture, you know, I feel like we tend to look over what intersectionality looks like when it comes to anti-black racism. We don't see a black face as being the oppressor. And sometimes that's the challenge, because my intersectionality may look different than Shequita's. Right? So if you're not taking all of me into consideration and you're just putting us both in the same, oh, they're the same because they're black women. No. You know, there's definitely different needs, and you're only perpetuating white supremacy culture by doing that. Right? Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely. Right. We're a monolith. Didn't you know, Laura? We're all the same.
Stamp.
You know.
I got me a black woman here.
Right?
We are not racist.
We made our metrics. We made our metrics. We got our diversity quota for the month.
Yeah, it's wild. Like thinking about the patriarchy and the way that that's structured, you could just get a bunch of males dropping, like forgetting that they have a family or a counterpart and showing up and doing this camaraderie, and that's how business was done. But you're only pandering to one thing, right? And so now, living in 2023, the world's so wide and globalization is in a full effect. So now we need to show up with all these other pieces and achieve all these other things. And I think there's just such joy in allowing people to show up in the way their full true selves, and seeing what they can give your organization, the work that you do, like as their full, like imagine, right? Imagine.
I would love to dream that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, just have a session where it is not tethered to, like, white supremacy culture or in proximity to, and just, like, dream. Like, just dream and build.
I love adding the word culture to that, because it's, when you just say white supremacy, it seems like something that people can disassociate from.
Yes.
Whereas culture is something that people participate in or are a byproduct of. So adding that word is super important. Yeah.
And anyone can participate. And Laura, you spoke to that, right? Like, anyone can manifest and be an arbiter of, like, upholding that system, right? Regardless of the face that we have in that, right? And there, like, you know, it's a currency, right? Like, there's a currency in that.
So data and analysis is super important in a resolution to anything. And let's be real clear, we're so far away from a resolution, like so far away, but how can data and analysis help organizations to assess the mental and physical health of Black women? And how can they track the creation of a healthier workplace?
Wow. I feel like there's so many benefits to using data. You know, if you were to look at how your staff is taking their wellness days or sick days, you know, really who or how you're quantifying their work, how is it submitted? Are there narratives that, you know, are disproportionate? Are there Black women who are reporting to non-Black staff, but you're only hearing from that staff? How do you know the weight of the work that they're doing? And let's just speak about management, for example, right? I think oftentimes the question I alluded to earlier about, you know, sometimes our work not being validated, and when it comes through, you know, a different skin color, that gets celebrated. I've seen it myself in the workplace where there's mediocrity and it's being celebrated, right? And you know, and you know, how do we use data in a way where we can remove that? One way is really taking that work straight from the source, right? inputting that data wise. So you can see on scale what has the contribution been from upper management and so forth, right? And I see a lot of evaluation is usually bottom up. We're never really evaluating those in executive positions. And I think that's super important because that's the way forward for the organization. So if it's not two-tier, I think there's a lot of information being lost as to what the organization's actually doing.
There was so many, so many
gems
in what you just said, and like things that you just brought so much stuff up, to be honest. I also, just to add to that, is the way we're tracking that, right? We're not putting people on blast saying, okay, tell me what you think about this. It has to be cultivated in a very safe and confidential manner, so that folks feel comfortable giving feedback. You can't pull someone into a performance review and be like, tell me all the answers to this question, and then they don't know where any of that stuff is going to be going and how it's going to be presented. So I think I agree with, there's so many gems in what you just said. Shequita, what do you think?
I think a couple of things on data. First off, the analysis of data is so important. So to your point and all the things you said that I was like internally snapping to and externally, but about who's analyzing the data? What a lens do they have? Do they have an anti-Black racism lens? Like that for me is really important, right? Because I can give you the things, but if you're gonna say, well, perhaps it's XYZ or minimize it or dilute it, right? And not actually challenge it, then it becomes a bottleneck. So tracking the data, I think looking about how we also track meaningfulness and engagement in the workplace or disengagement, right? Because we can either be engaged or disengaged on a variety of factors. And so thinking about what is psychological safety look like for Black women in the workplace, right? Because it may not show up in your typical way that other employees may identify it. And so you need a benchmarking of where that starts from and what that looks like. What is psychological meaningfulness? So how are we finding purpose in our work? Is there job variety? Are like, what are some of the norms? And then what's the capacity we actually have to attain or fulfill that, right? And so then there's like the psychological availability of that. And I think, how do we track those things, right? So how are we tracking burnout? How burnout happens, right? How vicarious trauma may be showing up depending on the roles that we are carrying and the layers and the labor that we're carrying, right? I think about what are the accountability measures across the organization in reporting back on that, because it's one thing for me to give you all of the data, but if it goes on a shelf at the end of the day, then where, you know, we actually haven't improved the conditions of well-being for Black women and Black employees. And so I think about where are your accountability measures? Like, who tells you you're doing a good job, right? Is it folks who you can hold counsel with, or do you have a community advisory board? Like, where are the places that you get your validation from and that holds your feet to the fire to do better, right? And then what's happening internally with staff and clients and management. And so I think it has to be that 360, to your point.
And then I'll just add like two more things. I think the role that HR plays in this is vital to the success of this. So setting up those structures so that HR can be its true self at the intermediary between the organization and the employees, and it's not biased in either way. And I also will add transparency. So when are we collecting this? Why are we collecting this? What do we intend to do with it? And then following up on those actions, right? So that folks in your organization know what to expect and they're not just going to be put on spot. We're sending out a survey on Friday. Make sure you answer it honestly, and then we'll do what we want with it, right? Those are really important pieces.
And there's multiple avenues for feedback, right? Yeah. I think not everything lives and dies in a survey because like survey fatigue is real coming out of COVID. And I think everybody has like had them a good pulse survey, employee engagement survey. And so I think, what is your data culture in the organization? So it's not just connected to one moment in the year, to your point, but like, what's that culture of always engaging and seeking feedback?
Yeah, that's where active management and leadership can be so effective, right? Because although you're going to have many confidential conversations, but what's the purpose of you building that relationship with your employees if you're not going to work to protect them and to resolve any issues that they're seeing? You're just then creating another chamber of like gossip, to be honest, right? So like, what is the purpose of you asking for that story if you're not going to move the needle towards protecting your employees, right? Yeah, all of the things. So we've talked a lot about physical and mental health. One very, very important component to a woman's health in the workplace is the factor of pregnancy and postpartum. So I want to hear some thoughts on that. And I'll ask a formal question, but like, this is a very huge subject, and you could have lovely experiences on all of those as a Black woman, but we know that's not often the story. So feel free to branch out beyond the question. But I'll ask, how can the workplace policies and practices be adapted better to accommodate the needs of pregnant or postpartum Black women, taking into account their mental and physical well-being? It's a big question.
Yeah.
It's so
Huge.
big.
Sure. I think one, just on the onset, congratulating first. You know, we have a woman here who is literally about to create a miracle. And I myself, I've had some dreadful situations where I felt the need to hide my pregnancy because, you know, it's like as soon as you say you're pregnant, it's almost as if what they're hearing is, I can't do anything.
Yes.
I am useless to you. And it's just nothing of the sort, you know. If anything, I feel like I've gotten more strength from my pregnancies, just as perspective and just being able to, you know, see life in a different way. You fresh eyes, you know. But yeah, I would say overall the biggest opportunity there is to just be supportive. You know, if you don't be the problem, the workplace can sometimes be the challenge, in the sense where if you have to have modified duties, have other opportunities. There's always a way for someone to be useful. I think it just needs human resources to be aware of what avenues their jobs can shift if need be, like depending if it's like a labor position. But overall, the accommodation is necessary. If no one would be here if a woman wasn't pregnant, right? So.
Yeah, I think having options are like for any woman in space and person, like really having options is always vital and essential. And I say that because there are so many dynamics that show up, because also sometimes culturally folks are like, don't touch my belly and don't come next to me. And folks just feel entitled, especially women, but entitled to Black women and space. And there are so many times that I had to like just do some very swift step backs, like some real quick ones, you know? Because
You're nice. I was swatting.
I was trying to, we on a podcast, girl, so it's just, you know, I said swift step back, right? But like one of the things that I think about is oftentimes the entitlement that comes with feeling entitled to absolve or take away autonomy from women in those spaces. You know, from when women have to disclose, right? to, making decisions in rooms that we are not a part of because they're like, well, I don't think Shequita can make it. Who told you that, Sway? Like, how did that, but I think it's under this guise of niceness or wanting to be helpful and without removing the person from actually being part of the decision or plan of care or support, right? And so I think about all of that. And then I think of the flip side of us as Black women having to perform and do extra because we know that the work environment oftentimes may not be safe. And so we perform like triple duty because we're like, we're going to go away and our folks going to forget about the work or, go, move away from it. And I think about if we had environments that truly really allowed us to show up as our full selves and did not build systems of dependency, I think of how much less stress I would have in feeling like I can step away from the work, right? Because it's always that moment where you hand in your plan and you're like, there's so much to do because of the work. And I think about also cultivating a space where women, Black women, can step out is actually picking up the role and holding it, right? Because so many times we do it because there's an absence or a void in oftentimes the unspoken stuff around the labor. So I think about that as one piece, and then having flexible like schedules when coming back into the workspace is really essential. Even like things as small as like breastfeeding stations or things like, pumping, like that makes a space accessible that oftentimes like women will just go to a washroom and like, I just think about breast milk and sanitary and like in a washroom and like, is that like, how do we show up and like actually show care?
Yeah, I think the huge thing is like getting that plan back and everything's postponed, right? No work has been done.
That's
like,
where the
okay,
stress
you're
is.
out and postponed everything.
Yeah.
I think that also when you have the space where women can have babies, you need to also take into their healthcare rates and their delivery rates. All of those things are super important. So knowing that this person may be dealing with a lot when they're showing up, they could have not been able to get a doctor. If they got a doctor, they might be gaslit on all of the conditions that they're feeling, so they're not getting proper medical care. You don't know what that looks like for them, right? And are you adding to the problem when they show up at work just by dismissing all the things that they're dealing with? And then also we need to make space for infertility and loss of children.
In our policies as
yes,
well.
Yes.
Those things show up,
Yeah, because those are real factors. They don't just affect one demographic of women, right? They affect us all. And so making space for that in the workplace is important for the mental and physical health of Black women. I want to take a break here. We'll be back shortly, but I'm very excited to continue this meaningful conversation. So we'll be back in a moment.
All right.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Kofi Hope.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shireen Ashman.
And we are co-founders for the CEE Centre for Young Black Professionals. And today we want to talk a little bit about CEE's journey. So the history of CEE really goes back to 2005, the year of the gun, which is, to be honest, an emotional time to think about, especially with where we are in 2020 with gun violence in community. And having seen a few of those cycles, but at that time, it was a year that was incredibly traumatic. So many young Black men and women lost their lives. I was a student and advocate at the time, and so many of us in community were saying, we need a real response, and a response that invests in youth and actually understands Black youth aren't the problem here, but the solution. And with the right supports, we can actually turn the tide around these issues. And from that was birthed, the Youth Challenge Fund and a series of responses, but YCF specifically one about supporting new initiatives that could be led by Black youth, focused around meeting the needs of young Black men and women who are facing barriers. And so when I came back to Canada, I was overseas. I was approached around a project, what they called a legacy project of the Youth Challenge Fund, and asked if I could start assembling a team and getting folks together to build an organization that could have an impact around these issues. And so CEE really started in 2012 in the Jane Finch community. We spent a year doing research, trying to figure out, what was the right place for us to be to create economic opportunities and move youth forward in a way that was actually authentic to what young people were looking at in their lives.
And for me, as a survivor of gun violence, connecting with Kofi around this issue is of huge importance to me. I wanted to do work in this area, not specifically around how do I kind of heal communities from gun violence, but how do I help Black youth to discover and uncover their talents so that they don't have to see that type of avenue as the only way, and how do I help them to kind of rediscover their talent. And that's one side of it, but also demonstrate to the larger public that Black youth is a talent pool that is untapped. And it definitely requires their investment, not only financial investment, but leadership investment, and looking at how do we bring that to the fore in a very practical way. And a lot of the curriculum was around exposure, like exposing Black youth to different avenues, different opportunities, different industries in which they probably have not maybe explored before, and even exposing Black youth to different spaces in their own city. Kofi is always the leader in terms of bringing us into nature and teaching us about different plants and etc. So it was just always important for me that level of exposure is there.
Yeah.
Right? Not only for industry, but as a person, like building the whole person. Because I think, and I continue to think, that really sound career that is long lasting happens when the person feels whole. Right? And when they know what their different strengths are, and when they have a system of support of folks, whether that's inside of their communities or outside of their communities, but just a system of social capital that they can go to say, hey, I have this problem, or I need to figure out how the system navigate this thing. And to this day, I still get calls from some of my members that I worked with in 2012, 2013, around okay, this thing is happening at work, Shireen, what do you think I should do?
We are the CEE Centre for Young Black Professionals.
Committed to cultivating a talent pool
of young Black professionals
that positively impacts
the Canadian labor market.
Welcome back. So that was such an impactful first half.
Yeah.
I'm going to pass the mic to Laura. I'm going to let Laura ask some targeted questions on resolution. So the first half, we talked a lot about the issues and the experiences, and I think we can't have one conversation without the other piece. So Laura's going to start asking questions on resolution.
Sure. Okay. So, you ready, Shequita?
Hot seat.
So are there any actions or behaviors that women appreciate and want to see more from others who do not identify as women?
First off, if you see something, say it. It shouldn't be on us to always name the thing, especially as Black women. I think for me, sometimes the frustration is that I'm not always the only, either the thing has happened to me or the bystander. There are other people witnessing the same behavior of lack of accountability. And so for me, it's how, one, are you validating Black women's experience in the workplace? not having us have to re-explain over and over and over. And in the VAW sector, we call this sometimes trauma porn. Like, you have to retell your most goriest stories. And when is it enough just to say it once and have it believed, right? And have the follow-up action items happen following that, right? And so I think about that as a place of like showing up as a co-conspirator, showing up in true like doing the work alongside and checking in with folks around what they need, because what might be good for me is not good for the next woman. And so we're not all the same, and we're not all a monolith. Blackness is not a monolith. And so having it in your policies, but also having it in your actions, where your approach will look different based on the needs.
Love that. Love that.
I would just add to that piece, like, outlawing tattletale behavior. Like, this is not an organization where you're going to be allowed to be like, oh, that person didn't say hi to me, so you should pull them into a meeting and reprimand them. Or talking about people's appearance in a tattletale way. Like, people need to understand the severity of when you talk like in a reporting manner to a senior leadership or to HR, the effect that has. And is this going to make your organization better in the statement that you're making? Or are you just trying to bring someone down in a very targeted way through your tattletale behavior? So I think outlawing that is like
I think that is crucial, because oftentimes these things come in informal ways, and folks don't make the connection of power in the situation. And so it's like, oh, I'm just having this side random conversation
with the executive director of the organization.
Exactly. Like, it is never, no conversation is ever neutral. And there is no position of neutrality. Even when we are saying nothing, there's always something being said in the subtext. So thank you. I absolutely appreciate that. Like, it has to really show up in all levels.
And to both of your points, I feel like maybe that's an opportunity for data tracking. Often, if someone's complaining, they're compiling the data on the person targeted. However, why not look at that data a different way? These complaints were all logged by so-and-so.
In a targeted way.
In a targeted way. Why do you have so many complaints?
Maybe we should build out that portfolio.
I know, right? Exactly.
What's that person's work portfolio?
Exactly.
You clearly don't have enough work to do. You doing?
Right? So you have a lot of
It seems like there's a lot of time on your hands, right?
Okay, love it, love it. So next, I want to discuss how can employers promote work-life balance for Black women to ensure their overall well-being, both mentally and physically.
Okay, so this for me, I have a personal, as I'm sure we all do, but I have a very personal tie to this, as like I have a trajectory that's surrounded on like well-being, like specifically mental well-being in the workplace. I think for me, what was important when I was even looking for a place to work and I found CEE was like, what are those key indicators of the organizational culture? You can see it in the interview. Yes. You can see it in the interview through the questions they're asking, how they respond to my question. Am I allowed to ask a question in this interview? And CEE had there was such alignment there, right? And I think there is such a prioritization of wellness here at CEE. We have mental health hours that are standard across the organization. I was telling Shequita this morning, like, sorry, there's no one here at 9:30 because we have our wellness hour where we encourage everyone to like log off, disconnect, and like it runs so deep. Like it's so meaningful to be able to have that hour. If I see staff like their teams thing is green at that hour, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, please disconnect. It's not email hour. It's not catch up on those little task hours. It's that wellness hour, right? So little tiny things like that you can see when you step into an organization, you can see that they're prioritizing wellness. I think another thing that I've experienced that C does really, really well is like authentic check-ins. Not like if the question is like, how are you doing? And the answer is fine. Like, we're like, hold on.
Yeah.
What's really going on? Or it's like
Yeah.
work-based, like
Yeah.
not trying to like put anyone on blast. Please share how you're really doing, but like authentically, like, how are you doing? Like, can we help in any way to make it better for you? I think those are so meaningful. And like, we often say, collect those things here to then take it on somewhere else, because you're not going to get that workplace everywhere. Like, this
Yeah.
is a pleasure and an honor. You're not going to get it everywhere else. So it's your job, once you experience that, to take it to the next place and continue to create work cultures, because we're in such an area where a lot of the responsibility is on us to create that, whether it's through a voice of calling out what's incorrect, but then also actively cultivating safe spaces one piece at a time, because no one has all those answers. I don't know everyone's experience. I don't know everyone's wellness practices. So it's those little pieces to the puzzle, right?
Beautiful.
I think for me, I say this question fully knowing that I'm not the best at prioritizing wellness. And so, like, you know, I come here humbly in this, but one of the things that I think is really essential is disrupting the culture of productivity. Like saying that our worth and our value to a company is only tethered to what you produce. And I think when you shift that, it invites conversations for other practices to show up in its place, right? And I know that's hard in the nonprofit sector. I know that's like that is stitched into every grant application. Tell me how many more projects can you accomplish, right? And so the sector itself isn't far enough along on this journey. But for me, I think things that are really helpful are embodying and practicing what does our EAP structure look like that is not the cookie cutter, but actually having therapists and psychotherapists on file that community is interested in, that folks who are Black will say, hey, I'm actually going to show up. And then bringing those practices internal, right? So what does like clinical supervision models look like, right? Where you are meeting either in individuals or group conversations, but it's built into the practice of how you're doing the work. So it allows for folks to be able to also practice what it means to just share in a different way, in a different cadence than the organization is, based on what folks identify, right? So those pods may look different based on either affinity spaces, based on how people naturally group together, or team-based, whatever is most safer for the group, but having space where you have someone who can come in and just hold space. Because especially if you're someone who's always holding the space, there's never an opportunity for you then to turn around and just think, breathe. I also say this as a mom. So, you know, having spaces where it disrupts that notion, because also too, that's also tied to this is, you ever know anytime you're at home or you're doing something and you take like 10 minutes break and you're like, I could have done X, Y, Z, and you're super judgy about yourself on it, right? How do we like, you know, practice like really resting, right? How do we embody or reimagine what that looks like? And having a workplace actually support that, right? And so I think about those as ways, nothing specific in that it's one practice versus the other, because it looks so different to all of us. But I think about really diversifying what we consider EAP, also increasing benefits.
I was just going to say, like,
that was my next piece.
Bare minimum, have benefits.
Right?
Saying
like,
it into the camera, have benefits.
Have benefits for folks to also experience explore, whether it's internally and externally. I think of the places that I worked that were really well, where we had clinical supervision models, we had opportunities, especially if you were dealing with like community crisis. There were times where we were debriefing like situations that were impacted by gun violence or all of those things, and working with communities and community members. And so what does the vicarious trauma look like depending on the hard work that we all take on, right? And so I think about pods or spaces that allow for that then shifts the narrative or the conversation in the workplace. So when I ask you, how are you really doing? It's an authentic reflection or mirroring of that, as folks will share.
Yeah, absolutely. Echoing both of what you said. And I feel like the best workplaces I've been at paused enough for staff to be able to do that reflection of how they're feeling. It's so easy to be go, 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 especially when you're doing community engagement work. And yeah, I've seen the best organizations, shout out to the storefront, benefits day one. Day one.
Love that.
Full out
Yes.
wellness suite.
Food share.
Yes, food share.
Yeah.
You know, and it's, you can see the mindfulness, but now as an employee, I want to do my best. I feel like I'm prepared to thrive when you've considered me.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So, yes, echoing that.
And it's not coming as a result of burnout.
Yes.
So it's not predicated on me having to have worked myself to the bone.
Yes.
And someone really shifted this for me, really maybe 10 years ago, where they're like, when you take time off, it's not vacation if it's about recovery. That's actually not. And I was like, say what now? I was like, I don't know life without, like, you know, like
vacation?
Literally a coworker said that to me the other day. I was
Right?
like, I think I just need a vacation day. They're like, well, what's wrong? Oh, well, you know, my mind is really full. I think I just need like a break. They're like, that sounds like a mental health day.
Yeah.
Do that instead.
Right?
But like, that's the thing. Sometimes you need folks to remind you. And so
Yes.
that environment around you has to be positioned in wellness, because if
Yes.
not, no one is encouraging you to take care of your mind. You are not doing your best work if your mind is clouded with all of these things.
Yeah.
So what framework do we have in place to support each other through that, so your mind is less clouded and you are operating at optimal clarity? And it's not just, do we have sound portfolios, but it's also like what the framework of your department looks like. It's what framework is around you taking a authentic break, where your phone is, if you send a message or your manager sends a message or whoever's sending the message saying so-and-so is off, does that mean that no one messages you that day? Or does that mean that your phone and computer are going off all day and you have to deal with the guilt of not responding right away? That's
And that's a
not-
microaggression right there.
Yes.
Exactly. That's
So
not
cool.
a day
Yes.
off. So yeah.
Just aggression.
It is.
If I'm off, I'm off. And that should be respected, right?
Absolutely.
Wow.
And I think of taking it that into consideration, like whose schedules do we prioritize, right? Oftentimes it's like, great, this person is off and I'm going to bank their email. And so I love, like, that for me is like beautiful around like taking that time actually off and schedule your messages. Fine. You have 5 messages for Trynée. Just schedule it for tomorrow.
Schedule button is amazing. It can be on a phone. It can be on a computer.
You know? Oh, I love this.
Yeah. I'm taking that one back.
So am I. I'm like, schedule that.
That needs to be in there. Awesome. So in terms of employers, again, now what steps can employers take to raise awareness, to reduce stigma surrounding mental health issues among Black women in the workplace?
I just want to say this loud and clear. Having a workplace anti-racism seminar, workshop, whatever that is, and then allowing your staff to go back and corner people of color about what they just learned is not it. It's not it. So why are you doing those things? Are you doing them to check boxes? Are you doing them to create diversity within your workplace? If you want to create diversity in your workplace, have a diverse workplace of people of color, of people of experience, so that it's not, we had a seminar on Monday morning at 10 a.m. and then now we're going to go around and talk about how that's not it. You're further traumatizing folks.
And also building a culture of consent around what we are asking people to engage in. I think oftentimes we, especially coming out of engagements where there are very specific conversations, and then that like entitlement comes up, but people don't ask permission before they launch into, tell me your darkest story of racism. I need to, like, somehow you haven't seen all of the George Floyd happen and everybody and their family posted statements, right? I don't need to tell you another story of how racist, like, it exists on the internet and Google is your best friend. So I think about asking permission before engaging and thinking about when you schedule those types of engagement, because knowing that it may induce other really harmful experiences that people may have had. And so if you're doing that at the end of the day, or is it the beginning of the shift, right? Or the beginning of the workday. So someone now needs to stay their whole entire day with potentially experiences. So I think about those elements around that, but can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So what steps can employers
Okay.
take to raise awareness and reduce stigma around mental health issues among Black women in the workplace?
I think having conversations. I think there are conversations that are affinity specific conversations that Black women need to just get together and have, right? I think oftentimes not every conversation everyone needs to be a part of. And it is not reverse racism if it happens. So having conversations sometimes that are just in the family
Listen, yeah. Keep going.
just in the family
Just tell us.
conversations
Yeah.
before I have to expose my whole business to people or community members or a larger organization that doesn't understand the way my community works. And sometimes I'm mid-processing and you catch me on a whim, but this now inadvertently shows up in reprisal because now you've taken a fragment of what I've said in a moment of processing and it finds its way in the gossip or rumor mill and finds itself in an appraisal. Oh, well, Shequita's very overwhelmed, did you hear her story? And so I think about, similarly to the point around data and how it's interpreted, also when we have these moments, what are the guidelines of how we engage in a space? Because we aren't all coming in engaging from the same entry point. So I think about really affinity conversation, so people have space to process and it's not seen as a threat in the organization. Then having larger conversations that engage in an affinity in different ways, but I think we're speaking about Black women's experiences. Black women should get together and have a conversation, right? And then decide, right? Because if we're saying we're valuing the well-being of people, then it shouldn't come as a threat if they gather together. And so those are some things I think as a demonstration of how we do that. And then the next piece, the last piece that I'll just say to this is how are we shifting the culture of it? So is it just seminars or are we having benefits? Are we actually having an EAP that is reflective? Do we have community members who are coming in, practitioners who are trusted in the community, partnering with B3 organizations that are doing it well and modeling it? What are organizational mentorships that exist and models of saying that we're not the experts? You don't need to be the expert in everything, and saying we need support. And what does support look like? And then admitting when you've gotten it wrong, accountability and transparency, right? But when you are accountable, then what it means after is what you do after that. So I'll end there.
And I'll just follow up the point that I made earlier. So diversifying the workplace with intention, not to check boxes. So a lot of these things come around like, oh, we know there's a problem. What are we going to do to fix it? Let's check some boxes. So that's where you get into this seminar where people aren't prepared. People didn't ask for this. And then now they're like, oh, well, let's go talk about it with this person. So it creates this like weird culture of like, yes, there's issues, but then you just made every single employee's the person who has to change it rather than the structural and internal culture. And the way that that changes is through diversity, right? But you also have an accountability piece around supporting that diversity. Did you just bring in a certain amount of people and then they had extreme experiences of racism in their workplace and all left within a year? Oh, well, we tried it, it didn't work.
And sometimes, like, that is also the setup. The flex is like, to say we did the diversity thing, we've checked it, but just didn't work. We had a diversity coordinator. It didn't work. So, and you set, like, it's still within the context or the structure of white supremacy. So you actually, what you did was just shuffled chairs on the Titanic, but actually never did anything to change it, right? And so I think about some of those things.
And you said the partnership piece is important. Who you're doing business with, why you're doing business with them is extremely important. And your employees see that, right? They see that.
Yeah, you really struck a chord too when you mentioned the fact of having the permission to convene as Black women. I feel like our culture as a whole has been up for sale for eons, but also we haven't had that true safe space in many work environments without an observer. And that, our culture has also been observed in order to be exploited many times. So it needs to be respected and, understood as to why there needs to be a safe space to convene without being threatened. That whole reverse racism piece. It's not as if anyone's doing something to you by needing something for themselves, right? So yeah, that really needs to be taken into consideration. The stigma piece of, potentially being black-faced. Yeah. You want to say something? Yeah, okay. Yeah. But that is a real one. What measures can organizations take to address and reduce disparities in healthcare access and outcomes for Black women in the workforce?
Yeah, I think we touched on this a bit when we said the benefits. I think that you should allow your employees to audit you on the services that you're offering. So not like, we have the best this and the best that and come work for us. Getting active feedback on like what employees are asking on contract renewal, and are you implementing that in any way? Or are you just saying like, no, we can't do that? Getting actual real feedback on what that benefits that you're offering to get services for mental and physical health. And then are you implementing that, right? So have you had the same benefit plan for the last 30 years? Not taking account of inflation, salaries, change in culture. So allowing your employees to audit your resources, essentially.
I think for me, similar to you, I really stuck out for me the benefits piece in that as a tangible way, because oftentimes we know the structure of nonprofit is precarious employment, oftentimes at the front lines. And when COVID was a testament and an example of how that shows up in who were working front lines in different spaces. We saw Black women really take the brunt of that in access disparities. So even in things like who had access to even socially isolate and distance themselves, or work from home options, coming from the sectors that I'm from, it didn't look the same, right? And I think about how do we show up for folks in that moment, knowing that not everyone have the same or similar types of conditions to even isolate in their home, right? And so I think about what were the benefits, what are benefits that do that, but also what are the tangible ways in which we are learning from the past. So what are the, if we looked over 5 years, what are our exit interviews saying? What are our orientation around what people come in? I always like to think of what are people saying when they first start a job? Because, you know, usually we're fresh, right? We give our, we say all the hopes, dreams, and wishes, right? And then, you know, something happens, employee life cycle happen, disparities happen. We have inhibitors that happen, right? That take away from our experiences, and our exits happens, right? And so I would love to see employers actually do a cross-analysis of that, of what that means in terms of how we show up and how that's linked back to well-being, health, and healthcare access.
And I'll just add to that, like, what is the why in retention, right? So if someone's been here for 5 years, like, what is the why? Have they been challenged in their career enough to be fulfilled to stay here, or are they staying because of necessity? Because they've tried the job market and it's rough out there, and this is where they have to settle, right? So, like, knowing that why, it's active. It's being an active employer, right? These are not gifts, right? You have to play a part in it.
Yeah. And career progression, you like launched into that. Like, what does career progression look like? But in the way of when we are actively engaged in like that retention strategy, how do we move in spaces where we are not just supporting people so that they can be the best products for our company, but potentially preparing them for others. I think in the sector or in any space, we create dependency models. And so I'm only going to invest in you based on what you can extract and get from me for this employment, for this moment, but not actually saying, I actually am invested in your whole self and I want you to be the best for wherever you go, right? And that's like an actual shift of centering the person, and you choosing to stay here is a gift, right? But we're going to do our due diligence of what we need to do as employers to invest and pour into you based on what your needs are, and we can co-create that together.
It's an active exchange that goes beyond the numbers on the page, right? Yeah, no, I love everything you just said. It's my favorite thing. I'm like, okay, tell me I can observe the talents, but tell me what your talents are that maybe I haven't seen that we can start applying. Like, where's the opportunity, right? And I think often when you look at job satisfaction, it's often when they stop being challenged. There could be a lot of other things happening, trust me, it's a long list, but it's that piece of when they stop being challenged and stop being given opportunities for whatever reason that could be. Like, that's where it's gone wrong, right? So either leadership's not doing their job and actively engaging, and there could be other things at play here, but that's a box I always want to tick. I always want to tick that box of actively having those conversations of how we can enrich your experience, how I can add to your talent experience, because resumes are no longer, I did this, I did that. Yeah. It's the accomplishment piece. Yeah. So when you leave this place, what are those big accomplishments that you can stand on as steps in your career? That's the approach I want to take, and that's the approach I want people to take with me as well.
Mm-hmm. A really good piece for me that really I love doing, and I learned it from an old mentor of mine, is she had us do all of our like skills, all of those things. And I in any space I go, I'm like, the first team activity we're doing is this. But we always like lay out all of our skills, right? Like, we go through a series of questions, but we lay out all of the things that we want to know, right? And this is before I've looked at any personnel file, any of those things. It's just, I just want to get to know you. I don't care what came before me, but like, let's engage in a way that is different, that we're building together, and like doing a real like skills a matrix of what we want to do, but also matching that around what we want to learn, right? And I do that as well. So it also invites vulnerability to be like, I actually want to learn this skill that you are really great at. You are really great at making bomb presentations. Like, let me learn this from you, right? Like, you know, like, and it's an exchange.
How does Canva work?
Yeah.
Show me all the
right? Yeah. But like, I think those are, when I think of how it goes beyond that, because sometimes we know from our sector, we always don't have the funds, right? So what keeps people beyond the moment of the funds? And I think it's those moments that we're talking about, where it's that social exchange, it's that purpose, it's that meaning of how we are growing together. And when growth stops or our stagnation starts to happen, burnout follows, you know? So, thanks.
Love that.
I really like this question.
I'm loving the conversation because as much as there's so much synergies as to how we're thinking, just learning the new perspective and just highlighting, you know, everything that you guys have just said. It's one thing to retain someone. Someone can be there and still not be present, right? And if you want to get the best out of any employee, specifically Black women here, invest in their own personal growth, understand what their needs are. And it really feels like we're saying, you know, that whole do unto others as you want done to yourself. You know, I feel like sometimes that's one key element is when you're looking at your Black woman, she just wants the same thing you want for yourself. I feel like it's not so far off of a mirror. You know, I remember an example of revitalization happening in a community that I was in, and they came out to consult, and they're saying, what are some of the things you guys want? And we summed it up by saying, well, what are some of the things you want for your children? We would like the space to reflect that too, right? So I feel like sometimes that's the piece that's missing. You know, upper management or executive teams, you know, they know that they need to invest in their own personal strengths and well-being in order to continue running the organization, but so do all of your employees.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with you on that. And there's like real data behind the wage gap, and the wage gap that Black women have is very different from white women and male counterparts, right? So there's real data to back those things up of that we are not even being heard on a basic level.
Absolutely.
And all we're asking for is an even, like, and again, like, we know the even playing field doesn't happen by just being like, yes, we're going to give because everyone's coming with different sets, right? Equality and equity, they're all at play here. But like, really, we're just being asked for what others are being gifted, right? And so when we're we're not asking for too much. We're asking for a safe workplace. We're asking for sound management, sound mentorship, right? And so these are things that others are just being gifted. And so,
absolutely.
Yeah, we're asking for the same thing that others want. But for some reason, like time and time again, we are not given that. Yeah.
Love it. Okay, so we're going to take a segue, take a little break here, and we'll be back with more insightful questions.
Ooh, I look forward to it.
Five seconds. That's all it takes for your first impression of me. Know how long it takes to shake it off? A lifetime. But I'm not waiting. I've got dreams to build. Places to be. Bias will not slow me down. Injustice won't define me. Nor a narrative written in a time before me. I'm here to show you who I really am. Nobody knows what it takes like I do. Like we do. It's time for the world not to just look at us, but to see us. Black youth can.
Welcome back, y'all. This has been a great and meaningful and conversation that I'm taking so many pieces from this, but
So
also
am I.
deeply reaffirming, right? Which is what we want young black women in the workspace right now to know, that you can have those conversations with other black women. You can be reaffirmed in your position.
You can talk about salaries.
You can talk about the salaries.
You can talk about salaries.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
those were things I wish I knew, you know?
So I want to just kind of have an open conversation now. Like, maybe what are some things that resonate in those conversations, or some questions that bubbled up that we can ask each other?
I think for me, I have a question for both of you. What was in coming into this work in the sector, what was the thing that made the difference for each of you in your work, like in being here or in staying or being sustained as black women?
For me, it was definitely being motivated. I came across so many people in the industry who were very giving of their knowledge. Some who just took me under their wing and just showed me what changes and practices helped them. You know, as grassroots, I felt stuck many, many times. And if it wasn't for those people who were willing to share their knowledge and have that, you know, wisdom circle with me where I could feel safe to ask questions and ask for guidance. And I feel like the beauty from what we were talking about before is not all those people were black women. And they were willing to open the door and let me ask questions, right? And I feel like when we're talking about, you know, having the opportunity to do different things in an organization, whether that be at an executive level or not, having an open door policy where black women can come in and feel safe to ask the questions, to probe and explore, would I like to do this, right? That was it for me. And then also seeing the change. Change is such a motivator to know that you're a part of something, you're a part of a movement that's growing and enhancing others' lives as well as your own.
I love that for you, Laura. I think a big part of it for me is tied to, specifically in the position that I'm in now and the work that I'm doing now, is tied to my personal identity. But I knew very early on, whether it was growing up in the church, whether it was seeing the impact of community, that was something that not only was important to me, but something I wanted to share with my children. I wanted to share with them the value of civic engagement and the value of making space for community instead of a capitalist society. I wanted their answers. I wanted them to be able to think about an answer that wasn't, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a lawyer or a doctor. I wanted them to think about their impact as a human. And I know that's a huge question for kids, but
I love it.
As a human, there's such great responsibility in being a human, right? And so I wanted to instill that in them very early on. And I think when I say this, coming to this work specifically at CEE is tied to my identity, is because it took me a long time to find a place where I felt comfortable and where people looked like me and had similar experiences to me as a human, not even as a person of color or a woman, but as a human. We often know what corporate lifestyle looks like. Everything is very robotic, and people disengage as humans. And so it was just very important to find a place that there was humanity in it. And humanity in our services, humanity in everything that we did. And that's why I say, I don't use the word honor or privilege lightly. That really means something to me, to be working in a space where you're seen. You are seen, no matter who you are, no matter where you're coming from, you are seen. And I'm seen. Right? So, yeah. What about you, Shequita?
Wow. for me, I think it was Black women who started me off on this path. Like, I think back to my early days of getting into this field, of doing this work, and it was like different either community mentors, femtors, who like took me under their wing. They're like, you know what, you need to learn this budget. I know it's boring, but come sit. You know, I know you're falling asleep. However, write me a little one-pager about the program we just discussed, right? And that was so powerful, being in a space where not only were your thoughts valued, but you actually saw movement in the change and the outcome, right? And so, you know, and then being trusted with that, right? Like, so actually having community members and like folks, I remember really early on in my career, someone's like, we're gonna give you this project and we want you to run with it. And it's 80 grand and you run the whole thing. And like, just to like have space as a young person, just being like start to finish, run it, do all of the things, come back when you need support. And that for me, I take that because it has led into any space that I've gone in, either working with young people or working with just other folks, always knowing how do we show up in collaboration, and for me, trying not to build models of dependency, right? Because once I leave, how does this thing get sustained beyond me? Right? And that actually is a true investment or a divestment of ourselves. It's not about me, it's about the larger purpose of the work. And so I think about all of the aunties, the uncles, the community folks who like also railed me up and came and come for me and said, listen, nice try, you know? When I worked in spaces and the community aunties would come and cuss me out, you know, and say, listen, you led a community dialogue and these things were not addressed. All of that built and fortified me, right? And I laughingly or jokingly now say the story about when I first started at an organization, really fresh out. It was this auntie, she was like 80 years old, right? But she's so involved in community. And I started on my first day, you know, I was real good. It was like in a gym, we were doing a job fair. And I was just supposed to shadow, guys, just supposed to shadow. And she came at me and said, why does the gym look like this? And like, she like came hard. And I just like took it. I was like, thank you so much. Like, you know. And then she was struck. She was like, oh, she didn't like cuss me out, like, you know. She went and said, and the person's like, oh, she's new, it's her first day. And she came back and apologized. But like after that, we were the best of friends. But I say that to say, like, how are we always anchored in community? And so any times we falter or we step out, we're the people. And community is wide, communities are wide, but we're our tribe who hold us accountable and in step. And for me, it's always been many folks along my career path and trajectory, but in particular, Black women were that soft landing spot for all of the things that I didn't know how to ask, but like they knew enough to just whisper for me to even dare to say it out loud. So
I love those pieces. I think like even bringing light to those pieces are going to inspire others to do the same. Like I am so inspired by what you just said. It like makes me think about the way that I lead, and am I doing those things that I set out to do? Like, am I creating space to be like, oh, you asked me a question 2 weeks ago, like, come, I'm doing this now, come watch. Yeah. Like, those are, and like, in the workplace, at home, like, what examples am I setting? I think I love that. I love that. Laura, do you have any?
Yes, I have a question for both of you. So, bit of a deep dive. When it comes to, you know, our own self-reflection and evolving and, you know, becoming more of our true self, what is it that you're doing now in order to put something to rest, to give birth to something new?
Ooh. We all did the, ooh. All right, you're going to take that one more time.
So, what are you putting to rest to give birth to something new?
Ooh, I'm going to let you take that one first.
Okay, I'm gonna be so honest about this. I really struggle putting anything down. Down. I am new to management in the last year, and I went through a change in my department that saw me picking up a lot of things. And it was a great experience for me because I was able to tangibly learn about things, but the time has come where I have extremely talented and thriving staff, and I have to put those things down that I mastered out of necessity, and I have to trust. And I am putting a lot of things down and able to pick a lot of other things up. And so that's one thing. In my personal life, that is a mess, y'all. I can't put a single thing down. But what I will say is I am challenged with a teenager currently who challenges my character. And I can get emotional talking about this because I know I have great ideas. I know that I have great ethics. But now has come the time for me to trust that I've taught her enough that she can begin to craft who she's going to be on her own. It's hard. I'm not going to play it's hard. This child tests me every day, but it will make me a better person. It will make me a better parent. It will make me a better partner. It will make me a better professional. Being able to say the time has come to stop and to watch and to wait for when the help is needed. So I'm putting down a lot of things.
I love this for you. I so love this for you.
I was getting watery on that.
I know.
Yes.
What am I putting down? I'm a bit of a workaholic. So I think I've been thinking about this a lot. In the last year, I am really thinking about work-wise how to say no. Like, no is a complete thought and sentence. And I think oftentimes when we're really fresh in wanting to learn and do all of the things, and because like at my core, I always value education. And so I really always am like, anything is an opportunity for learning. And so it's a bit of like reframing that because I've always utilized that philosophy in like work and how I navigate spaces. And so I'm learning to just say no. I've had that. And oftentimes as Black women, we check every box on the job application twice over, but we were like, maybe I didn't do it 3, like we always check that. And I think how to divest from thinking about how much product we produce and just showing up as our full being. And so it is not easy, I say this, because I'm so also very hard on myself. I think I have these like expectations, and so it is okay to shift and say no. So I'm learning how to say no in work. I'm learning how to create more opportunities for pause for myself, and also putting things down in a shifting environment that changes in the work, where I'm like, this is not values aligned. I'm okay with this. So that's professional. Personally, I have 3 kiddos under 7. And so it is hard to put anything down right now. However, I think for me, it's learning how to prioritize things differently. So it's an active exercise for me to look at my week and say, what can I move to next week and what can I shift, right? And that's okay, right? And so I think those are some pieces for me. It's just pausing, putting down a lot of pieces at work, but in home, how do I shuffle things so that I also get rest for me as well. I think we forget about ourselves, and so I'm not good to anyone if I'm depleted. So, yeah.
Laura, what
Thank
are
you
you?
guys. Thank
What
you
about
for.
you?
Laura, what
I
are
see
you?
how I was trying to dive in
I
there.
saw
I'm
that
like,
one.
thank you.
Nice
On to
try.
the
Nice
next.
try.
No, you guys answered that so beautifully, and I feel like I can feel part of both of you in what you said. Someone recently asked me that question, and I was so thankful for that reflection. For me, I'm really also learning how to value myself more. I feel like I'm such a cheerleader for other people, and I enjoy doing that. I'm not putting down my pom-poms, but I also know I need to also value my time. You know, equating time to experience and also monetary wise, I give effortlessly to community. And I am now being more conscious of not always doing that for, say, organizations. The community can get it for free. And now I value my time when it comes to those who are also getting money to work with me. Instead of feeling like I should do favors, and I enjoy doing favors, but then ultimately now it's taking away the time that I need to build finances for my family. So it took me a long time to get to that point. So I am becoming more comfortable with saying no. It's funny, but it's not funny. Funny, but not funny. How that's just a simple thing can be so challenging. And coming out of people pleasing, that was my biggest thing. It's okay if someone doesn't like me for what I'm doing to benefit my wellness. That's okay. Yeah, and then personally, oh wow, personally, wow. Okay, let's open that door. I feel so much of what you mentioned about having teenage children. I have 2 teenage children, and yeah, I have to say, my children are amazing, first of all.
They really are.
Right?
They really are.
They put up with mommy in the sense where, you know, I'll take them right, I'll take them left, but the point is, I'm just open your eyes. Look, this is all around you. So
You do such a beautiful job of that.
Oh
like,
gosh,
I have
thank
seen
you.
Laura in action, and I'm just like, what is going on? Because I left my children at home because I needed a break, but Laura's like, no, there's no breaks. We're experiencing this together. Let's go. And it's so beautiful. And I commend you for having all of the skill sets to do that, because it's not easy. It's not, I'm sure there's many private car conversations happening.
Conversation.
You do it so
I can wind up the window and yell.
You do it so beautifully, so beautifully.
Thank
Sorry, I
you.
didn't mean to interrupt, but
No,
you
no,
need to know
thank
that.
you,
Yeah.
thank you. I appreciate that. You know, for me, I just really, like you said, about letting go. I feel like that's been the most challenge. I'm like, I had no idea parenting would feel this way. I'm looking at my older 2, and I'm just like, what I was doing when I was your age, boy, the heartburn I must have been giving my mom. Wow. And it feels effortlessly to guide other people's children. But then when it's yours, I need to have more faith and understanding how not just resilient, but just how amazing they will do. They need to rise, they need to fall, they need to rise again. They're on their own journey. So I'm with you on the letting go.
That fall, man. That fall is so painful. Well, thank you for this deeply beautiful conversation. I appreciate you both, not only for everything you contributed, but always answering my call.
Anytime.
But let the folks know where they can find you, where they can connect with you.
Yeah.
Can you find me? I'm like the Black woman Where's Waldo over here. Social media. Can you find me on social media? I think if you Google Laura Hammond, you might see a LinkedIn.
Okay.
Yeah, LinkedIn.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Folks can definitely find me on LinkedIn, Shequita Thompson. I also have a website, STR Consulting. And yeah, you can find me. I love having community conversations and just spending time. So yeah, talk more.
Thank you again, both. And Shout out to the team at CEE for helping us put on this podcast. There's a whole thing that's going on behind scenes. Thank you to Matthias and Ivano and everyone else at CEE. And a huge shout out to City of Toronto again for supporting this very meaningful conversation. And we'll see you for our next episode. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.